I never thought a simple part-time job would lead to the most terrifying experience of my life. It started off just like any other job, clocking in, handling customers, and stocking shelves. But looking back, I realized the warning signs were there from the very beginning. I just ignored them. 2 months ago, I started working the evening shifts at a small convenience store in town. It wasn't anything special, just a way to make some extra cash. The nights were usually quiet, and I liked the routine. Then I met Rechard. He was the janitor, an older guy, maybe in his mid-40s. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about him. He was quiet, polite, and didn't talk much. But something about him felt off. At first, he only made small talk, asking about my shift or commenting on how cold it was outside. But over time, his questions became more personal. He wanted to know if I lived alone, if I had a boyfriend, what I liked to do in my free time. His tone was always friendly, but there was something unsettling about how he listened, like he was memorizing every word. I shrugged it off, telling myself he was just being nice. Then the invitations started. "Let's grab a coffee after work," he'd say. "It's no fun eating alone." I politely declined each time, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. In fact, he became even more persistent, waiting for me at the door after my shift, reminding me that just one drink wouldn't hurt. His insistence made me uncomfortable, but I convinced myself I was overthinking things. After all, he hadn't actually done anything. Yet, one night, against my better judgment, I agreed to get a drink with him. I felt guilty for brushing him off so many times, and I thought maybe if I just went this once, he'd stop. We went to a small bar nearby, and before I could say anything, he had already ordered for me. At first, the conversation seemed normal, but then, his demeanor shifted. He leaned in closer, watching me too intently, his eyes lingering on my face for too long. When I told him I wasn't looking for anything more than friendship, something changed. For a second, I saw it. His expression darkened, his fingers tightening around his glass. But then, just as quickly, he smiled and said he understood. I should have known better. That was the night everything truly began. At first, I thought I had nothing to worry about. Rechard had smiled, nodded, and told me he understood. Maybe he was a little disappointed, but surely that would be the end of it. He would move on, and I wouldn't have to deal with his persistence anymore. I was wrong. The very next day, Rechard appeared at the store, even though it wasn't his shift. He didn't say much to me at first, just a quick nod, a casual smile, and a few minutes spent browsing the aisles before purchasing something small. Gum, a bottle of water, a pack of mints, just enough to make it look normal. But each time I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. Then the messages started. Mobile phone, hey, just checking in. Hope you're having a good night. Mobile phone, saw you were busy at work today. You look tired. Everything okay? At first, I ignored them. I thought if I didn't respond, he would get the hint. But that only made things worse. Mobile phone, are you ignoring me? Mobile phone, why won't you answer? I stared at my phone, my stomach twisting into knots. I had never given him my number. How did he get it? Did he pull it from the store's contact list? Did he overhear me giving it to someone else? I told myself to stay calm. Maybe he was just being overly friendly. Maybe he'd stop on his own. But then he started waiting for me outside after my shift, always standing a few feet away, leaning against a lamppost, pretending to be looking at his phone. But I knew. He was waiting for me. One night, as I walked out of the store, I heard his voice from behind me. You shouldn't be out here alone. It's dangerous at this hour. His words made my skin crawl. I forced a nervous laugh, muttered something about having things to do, and walked away. He followed. Not close enough for me to accuse him of anything, but just near enough that I could hear his steady footsteps behind me. My pulse quickened as I turned the corner. His pace matched mine. I walked faster. So did he. When I finally reached my street, I dared a glance over my shoulder. Rechard had stopped under a streetlight, his face obscured by the shadows. But even from a distance, I could tell he was smiling. I slammed the door behind me, my hands shaking as I locked it. I barely had time to catch my breath when my phone buzzed. Mobile phone, I told you, it's not safe to walk home alone. That was the moment I knew Rechard wasn't just some lonely guy looking for attention. He was hunting me. I kept telling myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe Ride wasn't trying to be creepy, maybe he was just lonely, desperate for attention. I wanted to believe that if I ignored him long enough, he would move on. I couldn't have been more wrong. Over the next few days, I did everything I could to avoid him. I left work at different times, took alternate routes home, even stopped at a cafe just to throw off my routine. But no matter what I did, that feeling of being watched never left me. Then came Valentine's night. It had been a long shift, and I was exhausted by the time I reached my street. The air was cold, the neighborhood eerily quiet. As I approached my door, something caught my eye, a bouquet of red roses neatly placed on my doorstep. My stomach twisted into knots. There was no note, no name, but I already knew who they were from. And then, the worst part, the overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned my head and there he was. Ride. Standing beneath a streetlight, a shadow stretching long behind him. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He just stared. A sickening realization hit me, he knew where I lived. I had never told him. He had never dropped me off. The only way he could have found out was if he had followed me home. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears as I forced myself to move. My hands trembled as I fumbled with my keys, shoving the door open and locking it behind me. My breath came in sharp gasps as I backed away, my body screaming at me to do something, call someone, get help. And then my phone buzzed. Mobile phone, happy Valentine's Day. You looked beautiful tonight. I felt sick. This wasn't just infatuation. It wasn't just an obsession. This was something much worse. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside sent a jolt of fear through my body. I kept my phone clutched in my hand, expecting another message, another unwanted sign that Ride was still watching. But the silence was worse. The silence made it feel like he was just waiting for the right moment. By the time my shift rolled around the next evening, I was exhausted, running on caffeine and nerves. I considered calling in sick, but the thought of staying home alone felt even worse. So I went in trying to act normal, even though I knew I wasn't. My coworkers gave me weird looks. I probably looked awful, pale, jittery, ready to snap at the slightest sound. Then Ride walked in. He wasn't working. He wasn't shopping. He just stood there, in the back of the store, staring at me. I felt my stomach drop. My hands shook as I fumbled through scanning a customer's items. My coworker noticed. You all right? No, I wasn't, but I forced a nod, praying Ride would just leave. By the time my shift ended, he was gone. I exhaled, telling myself it was over. He had finally backed off. I was so wrong. As I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me. But it wasn't the chill that sent shivers down my spine. It was the feeling of being watched. I quickened my pace, turning onto a side street. Then I heard it. Footsteps. First slow, then matching my speed. I didn't dare look back. I turned the corner. The footsteps followed. I wasn't imagining this. Someone was there. He was there. My breathing turned ragged. I clutched my keys in my fist and picked up my pace. My house was only a few blocks away. I just had to make it home. Then his voice cut through the air. Why are you running from me? Panic surged through me. I ran. The houses around me were dark. No one was outside. No one to hear me if I screamed. I pushed myself forward, sprinting as fast as my legs would carry me. My porch, almost there, but my foot caught on the pavement and I fell hard. Pain shot through my hands and knees as I hit the ground. I barely had time to register it before I heard his footsteps getting closer. I scrambled up, forcing my aching legs to move, half running, half stumbling toward my door. I jammed the key into the lock with shaking hands, ripping the door open just as I felt fingers graze my shoulder. I slammed the door shut, locking it in every way possible. My whole body trembled, my chest heaving as I pressed myself against the wood. Then a knock, soft, deliberate, and his voice just beyond the door. You know this isn't over, right? I stood frozen, back against the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Knock, knock, soft, slow, deliberate. Then, his voice calm, eerily patient. You can't keep avoiding me. A shiver ran down my spine. I clutched my phone tighter, fingers hovering over the keypad. Should I call the police? What would I even say? That my coworker had been following me? That he left me flowers? That he was standing outside my door right now? Would that be enough for them to do something? And then my phone buzzed. Mobile phone, I know you're scared, but that just means you feel something for me too. I wanted to scream. My breathing was shallow, my chest tightening as I pressed the call button. The operator's voice barely registered in my ears. I could barely form words, but somehow I managed to get them out. Someone is outside my house. He won't leave. The dispatcher told me to stay inside, lock the doors, wait for the officers to arrive. I barely nodded before realizing the knocking had stopped. Silence. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. No footprints on the porch, no sign that anyone had been standing there, except for the bouquet of roses, still sitting by the door, still fresh, a quiet, unsettling reminder that he had been there. The officers looked around, took my statement, told me to stay vigilant. But they didn't understand. He wasn't just some guy with a crush. He was obsessed. That night, I sat awake in bed, every sound making my skin crawl. Was he still out there? Was he watching from somewhere I couldn't see? A few weeks later, I moved, quit my job. I changed my number. I did everything I could to erase myself from his world. And just when I started to believe I was safe, a single red rose appeared on my new doorstep. No note, no explanation, just proof that even when you run, some things follow. Police car light people like Rechard don't just give up. They don't take rejection as an answer. They escalate. Police car light, your instincts are there for a reason. If someone makes you feel uneasy, trust that feeling. Don't explain it away. Police car light and never assume that being polite will keep you safe. Sometimes distance is the only thing that will. The worst part? I'll never know if he's still watching. So now I ask you, Red Circle, have you ever felt like someone was watching you when you were alone? Red Circle, have you ever ignored a gut feeling only to regret it later? Red Circle, if you were in my position, what would you have done? Because the scariest thing about monsters like V is that they look just like everyone else.